Very, very quickly, I finally have a new book coming out. It comes out April 30th. It's called In Wonder Your People. It's a collection of short stories. I wrote it myself, obviously. I made the cover myself, and it's going to be available in hardcover like this, paperback, ebook if you're really broke, and audiobook. I'm recording the audiobook myself, which has been surprisingly harrowing. With my speech impediment. And 2 of the stories here are available on my Patreon in case you want to get a sneak peek real quick. April 30th. I think you should please buy it. Okay, goodbye. I'm scared of the pages in front of me. Black Country New Road's new work depicts ennui so compellingly. Kanye's descent into madness was marked by my, if temporary, descent out of it. Eminem is 50 years old, still rapping about his transgender cat being Siamese. Some of these stories write themselves. We don't even know Billy Woods' real name. And we don't know what he looks like either. I'm ashamed to admit, I've never played any of the Red Dead Redemption games. I suppose it's not a surprise, but I know these games are incredibly important literature, and they seem right up my alley narratively speaking. I'm perhaps even more ashamed to admit, I'm one of those people who will watch and read frighteningly long retrospectives and deep dives on games and books and movies I have not touched. Owl Criticism's video on Nabokov, for instance, is excellent. The Morbid Zoo wrote some of the platform's most arresting lines when she talked at length about the sound of freedom. In this case, it was Noah Caldwell Gervais's 4-hour-long plunge into the lives of John Marston and Arthur Morgan that swallowed my Monday whole. In the latter half of the video, Gervais talks about a character named Dutch, who is a kind of surrogate-ish father to protagonist Arthur Morgan. Dutch is a man who is thrashing against the back and front covers of a book that is surely closing. It is nearing the 20th century. The Wild West ain't so wild anymore. There is order and consequences, and men in suits are buying up the land that cowboys used to rip through. Gervais describes Dutch as someone who struggles against the tides, but is swept up all the more as a result. The more he lets his ego, his lust for the past, and the status quo shove him towards fighting change, the more that change bears down on him. The more the men in suits and the police and the Pinkertons are incentivized in their quest to crush him like the bug he ultimately proves to be. As I read vicariously through Gervais's stellar analysis, I was reminded of the quote from Jumpscare by Billy Woods. History is a snare struggling, rope evermore taut. Billy Woods was born probably in Washington, D.C. He spent fragments of his childhood in Zimbabwe and the West Indies, and is the son of a Jamaican intellectual and a would-be revolutionary. And that sounds about right, looking at his lyrics. It feels like I say this for nearly every rapper I cover, but Billy Woods is not only one of the best writers in hip-hop, but one of the best writers I've encountered, period. Earl Sweatshirt, another contender himself, said of Woods, "We're not talking about rappers, bro. We're talking about great American authors." He's one half of legendary hip-hop duo Arm & Hammer. If you're a Philistine like me, you probably first encountered them on Earl's album, Sick, or on Falling Out the Sky, their masterful collaboration with Earl and The Alchemist. Billy's partner, Elucid, has a sharp, knife-like way of delivery. Like the clarity of the images he's painting balances on a knife and requires your utmost focus. Billy Woods' rapping style, on the other hand, rings in stark contrast. He raps like he's your uncle eating around a campfire, and he's just remembered he has something to tell you. He calls you over, and instead of telling you a joke or reminding you to focus on your studies, he unravels his whole life before you like a ball of yarn, all with the same lax intonation, as if he's informing you that your fly is unzipped. You don't even know you're breathless until you taste that sweet, long-awaited inhale. Alive. Let's hope this shit works. The first Billy Woods album I listened to all the way through was his 2023 release, Maps. More than Lionel Del Rey's release that year, more than No Names, more than Earl and the Alchemists, no other album enraptured me so. John Womacker from Beats Per Minute wrote of the album, "It makes absolute sense that Woods would approach airports, empty venues, and packed planes as the compass for maps. All of them are transitory or incidental spaces in which individuals remain anonymous while out in the open for all to see. Conversations started here lead nowhere, destined to fill the empty minutes that tick down to the next phase of transition, and strangers remain just that. Years later and the faces blur, with only faint memories of moments surviving. There is a metaphor for the journey of life here, how unbound systems and time force us always forward, while consumption of goods and food and drink suggests the illusion of normalcy, all while we find ourselves under the eye of surveillance, tracked, sorted, processed, dehumanized, forgotten." It's a little cynical, but Billy Woods doesn't strike me as much of a humanist anyway. You see, Maps is preoccupied with distance, with the parts of the world we throw behind us, or the parts of ourselves we wish we could. And yet the album isn't entirely despondent. It is a road trip album of sorts, with no precise thematic or narrative aim. Woods finds himself flying past his baby mother's day-ruining ire, past his old self sleeping on a plane, past the rappers dying of chronic clout chasing, and he finds a kind of jaded acceptance. There is an uncanny balance he strikes on Maps, somewhere between being present, observing the world as it ripples and decays and blooms and kaleidoscopes around him, and of course, being absent, being unable to, as he put it on the track, "Bad dreams are only dreams," grab the new me, old self dozing on the aisle seat, Emirates where I left him, daydreams, treacherous ephemera. And maybe I'm coping, as the kids are wont to say, but it's that quiet balance that cushions the low humming despair on this album. Our lives aren't of much consequence, and neither is our hatred, and neither is our kindness. And it could just be Billy Woods' lack of face or real name, but it makes it easier to see yourself as him sometimes. I'm gonna ask this at the risk of sounding really privileged. You know that feeling when you're by a window seat on a plane, and maybe you're at the very back and you somehow got an empty seat next to you, what Bill Burr called the poor man's first class, and you're so many miles up in the air, and the world's chains on you loosen, and yes, it is quite literally burning beneath you, but what that's got to do with you? You're not there, you're apart from it. It's a kind of death, isn't it? A liberating, exhilarating kind of death. Being on that plane, being free from gravity, from other humans. That's what the album Maps feels like to me sometimes. Like Woods says on Soft Landing, probably his best song, maybe suicidal thoughts was the everyday struggle. For a brief, sweet moment there was nothing in the thought bubble. Looked at sky through heavy smoke with human fat, and God was not there. The cold, suffocating dark goes on forever, and we are alone. Live our lives, lacking anything better to do. Devise reason later, born from oblivion, bear children, hellbound as ourselves, go into oblivion. There is nothing else. Existence is random, has no pattern save what we imagine after staring at it for too long. No meaning save what we choose to impose. This rudderless world is not shaped by vague metaphysical forces. It is not God who kills the children, not fate that butchers them or destiny that feeds them to the dogs. It's us. Only us. Streets stank of fire. The void breathed hard on my heart, turning its illusions to ice, shattering them. Was reborn then, free to scrawl own design on this morally blank world. That is a passage from Alan Moore's seminal comic book, Watchmen. The person speaking there, a vigilante named Rorschach, is talking about what it was like for him after tracking down a kidnapped girl, only to find that her kidnappee had seemingly butchered her and fed her to his dogs. Rorschach, completing the circle, killed the dogs and burned the kidnappee alive with them. When I read that passage to my friend Jalen, he blinked and said, "Sir, this is a Wendy's." We laughed. Needless to say, I knew Watchmen would be this edgy, pomo piece of work, but I didn't expect it to so readily frighten me with my own reflection. I felt nearly the same way when I listened to Gollywog in the late spring of 2025. The album, content-wise, isn't necessarily all that different from Maps, but it's the framework that has changed. His interview with Ross Carano, published in the New York Times, ends with Woods lamenting the growing reader gap modernity has so kindly endowed us with, which, I have to say, hit a little too close to home. You try being a novelist in a friend group full of gulp gamers. And then Billy Woods admits that he knows a lot of artists who are brilliant wordsmiths but aren't too fond of reading. So he says, maybe we'll be alright. Who knows? He pauses. Maybe not, he adds. Do you get it? Maybe we'll be alright, who knows, is exactly the kind of sentiment you'd come across on his previous album, Maps. Observations from a distance, from a wide, macro perspective, with weed and freedom in your system. After listening to that album, I came to Gollywog expecting, as I said on my Album of the Year review, road trip music, or at least remarks with that lethargic, almost calming perspective. But if Maps is Billy Woods shrugging and guessing we might be alright, Gollywog is him pausing and admitting that maybe we won't. What's up, Hansa? Yes, sir. Keep in mind, I'm not saying Maps was a Taylor Swift album. It, like everything Billy Woods has written, was aware of how inexplicably unsettling it is to be a living being that is aware it is a living being. Maps was not blind to suffering, both the other and the self-inflicted, but it did not go out of its way to frighten you with it. There is no safe distance to watch the horror from on Gollywog. Woods' faceless persona is no longer a place to reside in. It is just one unrecognizable voice in a long hallway headed nowhere. And along the way, you hear a mother of two getting evicted by her landlord. You hear breathing pain taken from your parents, who took it from their parents, and their parents, and their parents. You hear the rabid dog in the yard. You hear the Gollywog playing dead, shivering and hiding from tiny white hands. You hear the dead keeping secrets from you. You hear the Ekwensu Ocha piling in to rape the land. You hear Nigeria has killed all its cheetahs and giraffes and rhinos, and you hear that 2/3 of those murders in the Midwest were state sanctioned. You hear that TB is on the rise. You hear that Sylvia Plath's kids were sleeping soundly when she stuck her head in that oven. You hear that Nicki Minaj was spreading lies, and you hear that Nigerian soil kissed American bombs, and you hear that 4,000 books have been affected by book bannings. You hear the iceberg sweating bullets. You're waiting to hear a silver lining, or for at least a break. Or if you are a fool like me, you are waiting, okay, wishing for a happy ending, and you are waiting, and you are waiting, and you are waiting, and sir, this is a Wendy's. The English language is violence, Billy said. I hot-wired it. I got a hold of the master's tools, and I got dialed in. Not bad. I think that's a good take. If it isn't, if it's shit, we'll record it. I got time. I'm out of school and out of a job. Nigga, I'm a bum. And so, is it foolish for me to wish for a happy ending? Is that not the very definition of hope? Is that not all we have? We have to ask ourselves, what is Billy Woods exactly? Is he just a chronicler of our gradual, granulating descent into madness? Does he see something we don't? Gollywog is a true horrorcore hip-hop album in a way that almost carbon dates early Tech 9 or M or any other horrorcore progenitor in rap. The album isn't experiential, lyrically speaking. Woods isn't inhabiting the mind of a hell-bound alcoholic or a deranged wife stabber. He knows we are no longer shocked by these things. We know the world is a demented place. We know we don't have the answers. Instead, Billy digs into the muck of it all and spreads the grime out like drying cassava. He gives us perspective as to how far we've come, how chronically, fatally unbothered modernity is by its own cruelty. Dutch from Red Dead Redemption and Rorschach from Watchmen both die meaningless deaths because of their unwillingness to change into something soft and malleable. The gears of that same modernity and postmodernity crunched and ground right through them in its overlong march onward. Dutch's surrogate son, Arthur Morgan, on the other hand, gets something akin to an honorable death if such a thing exists. He dies on a mountain, staring at the rising sun on a new world, having just passed down kindness to his junior. It is an ultimately useless gesture. That junior, John Marston, will die his own death many years later. I still yearn for an answer to despair. We are so complexly evil, and so naturally I want a complex good, a complex kindness to make us all complete, to make us, at the very least, feel that we aren't coincidental, needless creatures. But perhaps that's the problem. Perhaps that's why Billy Woods is faceless. Perhaps he isn't just a chronicler, but a question, one Arthur Morgan might have asked himself as the sun blessed his death on the mountain. A question so rich and so ornate that it envelops everything but one tiny, barely perceptible pinhole vacuum. I'm going to reach into the haystack here. I'm chronically unsure of nearly everything I say, so please keep that in mind. I think the aforementioned vacuum is the only thing that shouldn't be amputated. I think everything else needs to go. I think, as Billy Woods himself put it, you can't get away if you don't leave something behind. I'm saying complexity might not always be the answer to complexity. Simplicity might, on occasion, through some lenses, hold, if not the answers we seek, then the first step towards those answers. Case in point, Fox 8 by George Saunders. Fox 8 is not a children's book per se, but it's certainly written like one, and as such, its ideas are able to sneak through flood walls erected by pretentious navel gazers such as myself, and bestow upon its readers ideas that would normally make us roll our eyes. Here is a passage that proves what I mean. I know life can be good. Mostly it is good. I have drank clean cold water on a hot day, heard the soft bark of the one I love, watched snow fall slow, making the woods quiet. But now, all these happy sights and sounds seem like tricks. Now it seems like the good times were merely smoke that, upon blowing away, here is the real life, which is rock hats, kicking, stomping. The story is about a fox who learns English by eavesdropping on a mother reading her child bedtime stories. The fox, Fox 8, is endlessly fascinated by humans, these tall, wondrous, intelligent beings that make music and houses and great bedtime stories. Of course, he learns that we humans are angels and demons, rock hats, kicking and stomping our way through the forest he calls home. In this book, George Saunders argues that we are all the question. We are all Billy Woods, and so we must also all be the answers, the vacuum. Or, to quote George's fox directly, if you humans would take one bit of advice from a mere fox, by now I know that you humans like your stories to end happy. If you want your stories to end happy, try being nicer. I await your answer. Fox 8. Okay. Still quite a bit to record in it.